Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the show today. Our guest today is Craig Harguess. Harguess?
Hard guess,
Oh,
just
just the
like
guess. Okay. Pretend the G isn't there. I guess
no,
it's
no,
said
the
just
G
like
is
guess, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, hard
Y-
guess, yeah.
Harguess. Yep. Huh. Where does that name come from? Is it
I'm not
German?
sure.
German?
Maybe Dutch.
Just from
I,
you. It is. It is the Craig
I,
name.
I have no idea where it comes from.
Well, it's unique. I'll give it that. I've never heard it before.
I've heard it spelled different ways. I've had people ask me if I know what a Hargis, but it's spelled different with GIS. And
Uh,
we looked it up, down the road, and it looks like we were related somehow. And somehow the name got changed along the way. So I don't
that
know.
happens. Well,
Cousins everywhere, apparently.
Craig is the host of the Bad Roman podcast, and he's behind the Bad Roman project, which is related to the podcast. Now, Craig, the name the Bad Roman project podcast, it's not eye-catching, but attention-grabbing, because Rome is the quintessential empire in the Western world, and it usually has a good reputation, I guess you could say, in people's minds, because they did a lot of, building cisterns and roads, did a lot of horrible things too, but usually a positive connotation in people's minds. So to flip it on its head of bad Roman kind of makes people take an interest. So tell us, what is the Bad Roman project about, and how did you arrive at that name for it?
The name is actually something we've seen in these Christian anarchist circles for a while. Is and the quote, I can't remember who the guy was. I can't remember his name who quoted it, but it's sometimes being a good Christian means being a bad Roman, meaning we follow Jesus and not the state, and meaning you're not involved with state politics. So the name, that's where we got the name from. When I first was considering doing a podcast, a friend of mine, she reached out to me. She goes, I think you could do this. I think you've got the mind for it. You got the voice for it. She goes, but I think I've got a name for it too. She goes, we call it the Bad Roman. So I can't take credit for it. I could credit her for it. She's the one that thought of the idea of the name, and it stuck. And you're right. It will grab your attention. That's one thing I hear an awful lot from folks is that just the name alone. I had Mike Maharry on my show not too long ago, and he goes, "It's one of my favorite podcast names ever." And it
It
really
is
kind of
good.
goes back to it. Really kind of drove me into learning early church history as well, because we go back and read how the church and the Christians were engaged in the Roman Empire. They were bad Romans. They would be considered good citizens. They
Hmm.
were, when it comes to the Roman Empire. So it's stuck, and it's we've been doing it for about 4.5 years. I'm glad we got the name because it will get your attention a little bit, especially
Hmm.
when you take the attitude I carry with it as well too. So
Now, there's a lot of anarchists who come about it from a political or a philosophic, ethical lens, but specifically from a religious lens. I think that's something that is new to a lot of people, whether they're Christian or not. So does that derive from the doctrine of Christianity or the history of the church?
100%, 100%. I mean, there was if you read any of the early church stuff, they had no interest in what the Roman Empire was doing. They were being slaughtered for their beliefs in Christ. And when they said Jesus was king, it meant Caesar was not, and that got him killed. So it is Christian doctrine, and when coming, I used to use the phrase anarchist quite a bit when I first started understanding the philosophy. And I don't use it so much anymore because the word's been culturally hijacked to the point where it doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
Now, when somebody asks me these days why I don't participate in politics, why now I pay attention to it. I pay attention to it enough to know what's going on in the world, but I don't participate by voting. I don't participate by going to their public meetings. And the reason I don't do it is because I'm a Christian. I already have a king. That's final. That's the end of the story for me. So I don't, and I really lean on a lot of the early church writings. And Tertullian was one of my favorites when he told the Roman Empire. He said, we have no interest in your public meetings. The affairs of state are completely foreign to us. You fast forward to 2024, the Christians are so entangled with the state, and that's what we're trying to do with this is trying to get Christians back to just following Jesus and quit participating because you're afraid. Jesus told us not to be afraid. What are you afraid of?
Hmm. Probably the state is going to be the answer to that,
Well,
which
yeah,
I can understand.
yeah.
They've got a
I
lot
mean,
of
it is
guns.
for sure. Yeah, it is understandable to be worried about it, be afraid, but our destination is final. We already know where we're going.
Hmm.
We're here as ambassadors. We're not here to prop up the system. We're not here to try to make the state more Christian or get more Christians, in political office. That just is not what we're here for.
We'll see about how, because that was one thing that I thought of. Is I've heard people say that, well, we just need to get the right person into office. We need to get a good Christian at the head of the government, and then everything is going to be fine. And then it won't matter that the state's there because it's going to work for us and work for Christianity. What do you say to an argument like that?
I mean, you'd have to show me some evidence of Jesus ever encouraging us to do that, first of all. Jesus rejected any kind of political authority. He had no interest in it either. I mean, he rejected the offers of Satan to have authority over the kingdoms of this world. There's no evidence of getting more Christians in office is going to make it better. I mean, I don't remember the exact number, but it was over 80% of Congress, they were polled, and over 80% of them profess to be Christians. So if that's the case, Christians are screwing this up. Get out of it. Get out of the beast. Walk away from the beast. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't believe they're all Christians either. I mean, when I first started voting, I mean, first time I voted was George W. Bush. And what hooked me was his Christian beliefs.
Mhm.
And then 9 months after he was put into power, we were at war. We're still, and then now we're at continued wars. I mean, that's not Christian. That's not Jesus. It's garbage. The idea that we could get more people in power who profess to be Christians to get this thing right is. I try to pull my punches sometimes, but I don't want to hurt people's feelings. But it's very naive to me.
Mhm.
It's 2024. There is no evidence to this point that getting more people in power who hold to our beliefs is going to make things better. I mean, Christians have been one of the biggest causes of war because of their Christian faith.
Hmm.
Let's be real.
And when you think about it, that argument also would have applied to all of the previous years where the government was slowly heading downhill. Like were all the Christians just not doing anything during those times? No, they were still all voting, and it didn't matter at all.
Right.
It still slid slowly downhill to where we are now. I recall the Bible saying that Jesus said explicitly, "My kingdom is not of this world." Yeah, it seems.
Pretty cut and dry, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it says it. He said it right there.
Hmm.
It makes me wonder sometimes when I watch Christians get so up in arms when, especially this time of year, man, when we're almost to November, where it's election year, and watching, it's been very distressing to watch Christians get so up in arms about Donald Trump and and politics and stuff. And I was sitting there thinking, man, are we wasting our time right now? Are we wasting our time right now with all this? Because no, it doesn't. But it doesn't seem like people are paying attention. And I said that out loud to a friend of mine, and she sent me something that was so cool about that. I don't have the quote on hand, and I would murder it if I tried to quote it. But we're basically what we're doing is for the remnant. There's a remnant out there that needs to hear this, and we have no idea that they're listening. And then man, I tell you, when I was like I said, I was stressed out about this for a few days, and then almost immediately I started getting messages out of the blue from folks. Keep doing what you're doing. They were just so that was cool to me because it was very encouraging because you get to a point where, man, we've been doing this for 4.5 years and people are out there still running to the voting booth, but we're not going to get everybody involved, to understand what we're saying. But it's the people that we don't know who are listening.
So is the goal of the Bad Roman Project then to kind of awaken people to the nature of the state? And is that just Christians or everyone who will listen?
I mean, anybody will listen. A lot of what we talk about is not something that your mainstream Christian or familiar with, or even your mainstream anarchists, your secular anarchists. They're not familiar with Christians talking like we do. They understand Christianity, be involved with all that stuff. But yeah, the goal of the project is to just get people to start thinking for themselves and understand that we already have a king. The story has been written. It's over. We have a king. Let's get back. Let's follow the teachings of Christ. If you want to change this world, if you want to make this world better for your kids, let's take let's start following Jesus and his teachings now. And that can apply to even non-Christians too, because set aside faith and all that. I've had people come at me, secular type anarchists come at me like, well, say that Jesus wasn't real and all this stuff. And I'm like, listen, okay, let's assume for a second that you're right. He's a mythical character. He did never exist. What have I lost by trying to love my neighbor and even my enemy? The very basic teaching of Christ. What have I lost? And I think even your non-Christian could follow his teachings. I mean, Gandhi wasn't a Christian, but he admired Jesus and his teachings. And Gandhi had one of the best quotes when it comes to Christianity that I love. I love telling other Christians. He goes, "I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christianity." You know,
Ooh,
and it makes a lot of
yes.
sense when you see how Christians are behaving.
Hmm.
But he understood that he understood the teachings of Christ. He understood what they meant. And I think if we just put that into action, man, I don't think we can be stopped. I think we could turn this world upside down for the better. The people got to start doing it. They got to start putting the work and going and talking to your neighbor, loving on them a little bit. Even the people that are dismissing you and hating on you, love them. Just don't backbite. Just let's try the way of Jesus for let's try it for a year. Let's see what happens. I don't even think it would take that long.
Oftentimes, I've noticed anyway, politics and politicians will appeal to Christian or Christian-like talking points to try to polarize voters. Abortion is a big one recently, and it's one thing that I've noticed right now. The Democrats are really stressing, like they're talking about Project 2025 or something, how the Republicans want to outlaw abortion or something like that. I haven't seen the thing. It probably doesn't say that, knowing politicians, but it would be easy to get a politician to say, and for a Christian, I think, to believe that, well, there's this bad thing that people are doing. And even if I know the government does a lot of bad things, if they can stop this thing, then it will be worth it going and voting. I'll hold my nose and go for it anyway, for the sake of, so to speak, the greater good, for the unborn or whatever talking point it is. What would you say to folks like that?
Well, I mean, that's why I started voting was abortion.
Hmm.
I didn't know what team I was on, but I wanted to get involved somehow. And I heard Republicans talking against abortion. While I was a Christian, I'm against abortion. I don't believe it's a good thing. Now, that being said, I also don't think the state should be involved in it. Not whenever the Supreme Court came out and I don't, I don't even know if they overturned Roe v. Wade or what it was, but all they did was just send it back to the states. They didn't abolish abortion, and people were
Yeah.
fighting with each other. And I had Christians coming at me because I was like, listen, there's something else going on here. It's the state. You can't trust them. There's something else going on here. And he's like, well, but it's they abolished abortion. I said, no, they did. And I said, I'm against abortion. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that the state should be involved in it. I want to live in a world where it's not an option, where we love on the people that need help, that are having babies. I think that's how we change it. Don't get the state involved. And then on the left side, when they did that, I had friends that are liberals, and they were so upset about it. I said, you do understand that they did not abolish abortion. They just sent it back to the states. And if you have any just a medial understanding of the United States Constitution, they were just actually following the United States Constitution. That's all they for once they followed the United States Constitution and gave it back to the states where it's supposed to be per the 10th Amendment. Now,
Hmm.
so it's not like they abolished it. I don't remember all your questions. So I don't
So, so it sounds like you're against abortion, but also against making abortion illegal.
right. I just don't think that the state should be involved in it. I don't trust them. There's nothing about what they do that I can trust. So I always feel like if they're doing something that looks like it's for the good, man, there's something else going on because they don't do anything for the good. And
Mhm.
I'll talk to Christians all the time about when we talk about abortion. And I've told them, I said, do not tell me you're pro-life if you're supporting these ongoing wars.
Ooh, yeah,
You're
that's a big
talking
one.
about you're worried about this baby that's unborn. Well, what about that 5-year-old in Yemen right now that we're dropping bombs on right now? That 5-year-old in Gaza, that there's a genocide in Gaza right now. We're funding this genocide. What about that? you might be anti-abortion, but you are not pro-life. And I don't. That's one thing I will not pull punches with them anymore because they're so hypocritical. Don't tell me you're pro-life and then you support a war. You can't do it. You can't look me in the eye and say it because I'm gonna call you out on it.
Mm. I think that's one of the things that the state really enables is for people to kind of pick and choose the things that they want to see and then focus on that, and the state gets away with all of the other stuff it does that they can either pretend to not know about, or the state conceals it completely and they have no idea. How many people even know that the the food embargo in Yemen that's been going on for 10 plus years, and how many millions of people have starved to death because of that? But nobody knows. Nobody knows.
They don't want to know.
Yeah.
And the state is so good at manipulating folks too.
Hmm.
When you when you I can't speak for you, but for me, when I finally woke up to the propaganda, when I woke up to my eyes were open finally, I was like, man, I can't believe how easily manipulated I was. I thought I had a pretty good head on my shoulder. But no, man, the state's good at manipulating anybody,
Yeah.
especially during election year. It's wild to me.
Well,
But
it's because yeah, it's because it's everywhere. And it's like how you don't realize the air you're breathing unless you stop and think about it.
yeah.
It's the same thing with the state. It's just everywhere. So people don't even think about it until something happens and they realize, well, this is not right. Hmm. So another thing that I had thought of, Leo Tolstoy. I don't know too much about him aside from he was a good author, but wasn't he also a Christian anarchist?
Yes.
Okay. So now, as I recall, his was from the perspective of Christianity, of course, but he also tied pacifism into that. Am I right?
Right.
Okay, so where there are all kinds of Christian anarchists, I'm sure, just like normal anarchists, voluntarists. So I was going to ask, where do Christian anarchists stand on that? But there's probably a different answer for every person.
It
So
depends on who you ask. If you're
exactly.
asking me,
Yeah, and
I,
what do you think is was that a valid or a necessary part of Christian anarchism as
this
pacifism?
this is going to rub some folks the wrong way, but I don't think you can be a Christian anarchist without being a pacifist.
Hmm. Okay.
Especially if you're going to call yourself a Christian and follow the teachings of Christ. Now, the one thing that always comes up is self defense and defending your family. And I
Mhm.
listen, man. I know I was born and raised in West Texas. Gun culture was what I understood. I'm not afraid of guns. I've got a pistol in my closet. I like to target shoot. But it's always a knee jerk reaction to say, well, I've got to pull my pistol to end a threat when there's nothing in scripture that shows that Jesus would have done that or condoned that. But I understand, and I don't have children, so it's hard for me to say this and be like, well, I don't know how I'd behave if I had children because I don't have kids, or if I was married and somebody was raping my wife. Now, I'm not saying that being a pacifist is just sit by and not do anything. That's not what pacifism is. If there's a threat, you this is the way I handle it now, is or the way I think about it now. I will intervene to save somebody else, even if it means me losing my life. But I'm not going to kill somebody back. I'm not saying I won't harm them. I'm not saying that I won't restrain them. And that's another thing about pacifism. I've been told, well, you're not really a pacifist if you're intervening like that. I think the word pacifist is so misunderstood. It was explained to me this way once, more than once actually. Pacifism is simply working towards peace, actively seeking peace, working. When you understand that you're working towards something, it's not being sitting on the couch not doing anything. To me, pacifism is more active than pulling a pistol on somebody.
Hmm.
And
I
this
like that.
I've told people this too before, and I'm telling you, man, I try not to. I try to pull my punches, but there's some things that I won't. And I've told people all the time, I said, if your first instinct is to pull a pistol and kill somebody, then I think you're being very lazy. You've not thought this through. You've not thought through scripture what Jesus was saying, what the early church was saying. If you read the early church prior to Constantine for 400 years, lockstep with Jesus when it came to nonviolence. I'm not saying that they wouldn't fight back. I'm just saying they wouldn't kill people back.
Hmm. It's
Um,
interesting how many variations there are on the pacifist, how far in one direction or another someone wants to go. I like,
it's a difficult topic.
yeah,
It's one side. It's one thing that it's one thing that I've been in so many discussions about it, you know, and to be fair, I don't exactly know how I would react.
well,
For a while, I was
yeah, it's hard
training
to say.
jujitsu.
Yeah.
I was training jujitsu for a while before I got too busy, because to me that was a way to learn how to defend myself, restrain somebody without killing them. Now you can put them to sleep. Jujitsu is one of those one of those martial arts that you can put somebody to sleep pretty quick and end the threat. But I mean, if you're out there in on the streets and something goes down, I mean, I don't know that it's going to work, especially if you got a pistol. You might get killed.
Hmm.
But I just try to keep in my head, I'm not going to kill anybody back. Now, I've got cats that I adore. And if somebody came in my house and tried to attack one of my cats, we're going to have words and there's going to be some violence, but I'm just going to try not to kill you.
Mm. Cats are survivors too. They'd be all
Yeah.
right.
Well, they just go hide anyway.
So if it sounds like from your perspective, in order to let me put it this way, it sounds like rejecting the state is a necessary part of properly understood Christianity. So converse of that, or corollary to it, are people who call themselves Christians but still believe in the state, still participate in the state, are they, by definition, bad Christians by trying to be, shall we say, good Romans, as it were?
Yeah, I believe so.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's, I've got family that behave that way.
Hmm.
I see it all the time, but I don't believe, I won't go as far as say that they're not Christians. I think they're confused Christians. They've been manipulated. I have had
Yeah.
people tell me that, well, they're not really Christians if they're following the state. I'm like, pump your brakes a little bit. That's not fair. They've been manipulated and they've been tricked into this, like we all have. I mean, I can't speak for you, but I was, but I still knew Jesus at the same time. But I don't think they're being Christ-like if they're going to put somebody in power over their neighbor. I don't think they're being Christ-like if they're going to a voting booth and selected somebody to be their king, when we see very clearly in Scripture that it's a rejection of God. First Samuel 8, it's a rejection of God, when the Israelites were demanding a king. And if a rejection of God is not a sin, then I don't know what a sin is. You know what I'm saying? And so that I don't believe they're being Christ-like, but I'm not going to say that they're not Christians.
And for the first Samuel 8, where the Israelites had chose the king over God, what would you say to people who say, well, that was with a king? We're in a democracy, we have a president, not a king, so it's okay. What would you
I
say to
mean,
that?
they didn't call them presidents back then; they called them kings. I mean, but you know, it's the same thing in the New Testament. Like I said earlier, when they said Jesus was king, it meant Caesar is not.
Mm,
And the first 400 years of Christianity is that's evidenced all through it. I mean, there was no king but Christ,
mm,
and it got them killed. And I wonder sometimes today, a modern day Christian, if they said that no king but Christ, do they even know what that means? And if the state threatened to kill them for selecting Jesus as their king and not following the state, would they bow down to the state in order to save their lives? I don't know. I would hope not. But I
mm.
also don't advocate for anybody being killed either.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but it was so much part of the early church that there was no question. Like it wasn't something they had to think about. If you read the writings, it's amazing to me the stuff that they were saying back then.
Mm,
It's so different than what we see today in church. So different. That's pretty much why I don't really attend church a whole lot anymore, because it's too
mhm.
political. It's too involved with all that stuff, and it makes me cringe.
When do you think in the history of Christianity that started to change?
My opinion is whenever the church got entangled with Constantine.
Mm,
Once Constantine made Christianity the state religion, made it legal, and he was telling the church. I mean, he was involved with the Council of Nicaea. He was an emperor. He was an emperor. Why is the emperor involved with the church activities?
mm,
For the first 400 years, that wouldn't have been the case. But I think a lot of it too, it seems like, if I'm understanding it correctly from what I've read, they were tired of getting slaughtered. So they found some protection in the state.
mm.
with Constantine. But once he got involved, man, it changed the face of Christianity. It changed what Jesus was teaching,
Oh,
distorted it very much so.
one government touches something and corrupts it
Yeah.
every time. The Old Testament, Samuel, you mentioned the New Testament. Are there any specific scriptures that jump out? Because we undoubtedly have some people who will think of, for example, Romans, which is the one where Paul says, like, be subject to the
Romans
powers.
13.
Romans 13, yes. So there'll be some people who think of that. What's your take on that? And are there any other New Testament scriptures that are more explicitly saying no government? Thank you.
Well, the Romans 13 is always used for for folks who want to defend their statism, basically, but they're misunderstanding what he's saying.
Mhm.
In Romans 13, it says to be subject to governing authorities. Acts 5 says we are to obey God rather than man. Subject, and obedience are two different words in the Greek. There's two different definitions. And whenever Paul said governing authorities, I've cross-referenced this with folks who understand the Greek way better than I do. But when he said governing authorities, they in that day and time they understood that to be demons. They
Hmm.
understood that the state is demonic. They understood it. And then you got this. You can't take Romans 13 and say, well, this is it. This is the final it. This is it. And just completely discard everything else that Jesus
Ignore.
was teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a scripture when Jesus was told, he pulled his disciples aside and he said, you see how the Gentiles lord over one another, how their great men dominate them. It will not be so among you. Not so among you. He was showing them, you see how they treat each other, how they put people in power over themselves and their neighbors. Not so among you. Not so among you. And I can't say that enough to Christians. Not so among you. He said, not so among you. End of story. When Jesus said it, that should be the final story. That
Yeah.
should be the final thing that we go to when Jesus, with the authority of Christ. That's where we stop.
Like in modern
You,
English, he probably would have said, like, don't do that.
yeah.
Don't, no.
Have you not been
Oh.
paying attention to anything that I've been teaching you? You go read the Sermon on the Mount, everything that we talk about in the Sermon on
Mm.
the Mount, there's nothing in that that would lead you to believe that putting somebody in power of their neighbor is what Jesus wanted.
Not only that, but pretty much everything in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes especially, is the opposite of what the state does and what it
Yeah.
represents. One of one of my favorites that I think people usually take out of context is, the Pharisees were trying to get Jesus in some kind of trap. They were always doing that. Now this one was about the taxes, and Jesus ended up telling them. They asked him if was it lawful, legal, under the law of Moses, their religion, to pay taxes to Caesar, and Caesar's image was on the coin, and Jesus said, "Well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's." And usually people usually stop that right there to justify, "Oh, yep, see, we gotta obey, pay our taxes." But Jesus didn't stop there. Jesus says, "And to God, what's God's?" But in in the Jewish and by extension the Christian definition, everything belongs to God, and there is nothing that belongs to Caesar. So go ahead, give Caesar what's Caesar's. It's a really
I
short list.
yeah, well, I tell people all the time, I said I honestly believe that Jesus was being a snark in that situation. They were trying to trap him, so he's going to be a snark back because, and also, there's nothing that Caesar has that he hasn't stolen from somebody else anyway.
It's a great point.
So
And then
nothing
right back to the
belongs to him.
commandments, thou shalt
Yeah,
not steal.
yeah. But like you said, at the end of the day, everything belongs to God. I mean, I honestly believe Jesus was being a snark. Money didn't mean anything to Jesus. He didn't care about money. He could go find a coin in the mouth of a fish. He didn't care. Money meant
Mhm,
nothing to him. His whole ministry was about loving your neighbor, loving your enemy,
mhm,
nonviolence, and trying to change the world that way. So money meant nothing to him. We put a lot of stock in money because it helps us buy our groceries and pay our mortgage and our bills and stuff like that. But Jesus didn't care about it. He told him go. He told him go to the fish and find the coin of the fish. I mean, it just isn't. It was nothing to him. So
mhm.
yeah, the render unto Caesar, they just like you said, they will stop there and not finish well. And unto God, what is God? So everything belongs to God. Period.
Now, Craig, you've got the Bad Roman podcasts. That's part of the Bad Roman project more broadly. And what does that encompass? What's in the project?
Well, I mean, at first it just started off as a podcast, and it's just turned into so much more. As far as it is a project, I mean, the whole workings of what we do is to get to refocus Christians on Christ. The podcast we do it, twice or once every 2 weeks, but there's so much more involved. We're working every day between those 2 weeks on this. We had a blog that we were doing for a while, let people submit articles, but we just let it go waste. I don't have time right now. We've got so busy. My producer didn't have time for it, but the whole we'll get back to it at some point anyway. But yeah, it's just a project. We're just working to try to refocus Christ or Christian on Christ.
Hmm.
And the podcast is part of it. I actually think my producer came up with the Bad Roman project. I was just starting a podcast, and she kind of came up with that idea with the project. Let's turn it into something that more than just a podcast. So I try to do a lot of I like the one-on-one conversations out in the real world, other than podcasts. Podcasts are cool. Social media, it's got its place, but the whole talking to somebody face to face about this who are Christians and they understand no key but Christ, but do they really understand no key but Christ?
Like
I've had
they've
people
heard that
look at,
before, but
yeah, they could say it, but do you really understand what that means if you're in that voting booth? So it's a project, and it's going to be it's a work in progress for sure,
Mhm.
because it's tough, especially this time of year when it's an election year.
Yeah. I think it's neat how from so many different angles, from the religious, from the political, economic, philosophic, ethical, so many people look at things differently but come to the same conclusion that the state is one of, if not the biggest sources of evil in the world, and that it has to go. And I think that collaboration among different people who hold that belief, even coming from different perspectives, anarcho-Christians, anarcho-communists, voluntarists. The main key, I think, is that we're not trying to force other people to do what we think is right. Because at its core, that's a big part, I think, of what the state is, or at least how it gets people into its web, is to try to use it to force other people to do what they think is right. And I think being either a Christian or an anarchist, either of those or both of them should completely reject that, just as a matter of course.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we have a discussion group on Facebook where it, I can't speak for everybody in it, but the vast majority of folks are no keep it Christ. We agree on that, but they come at it differently with their different types. You got Orthodox, you got Baptists, you got Protestant or Catholics, you got and now former Mormons have joined the group too. So it's an interesting, diverse group. I don't really I don't debate a whole lot in there anymore, but I don't mind. I like to watch them. I like to watch the conversations. But you're right. At the end of the day, we understand the rejection of the state. We just come at it a little bit different. As long as we're trying to reach for that one goal, to end the state, I'm all about it. I've had atheists on the show who are anarchists. I'll talk to anybody about this. If their goal is freedom and liberty, we can talk about your faith or what or not or lack of later if you want. But if your goal is liberty and freedom, let's talk. I want more conversations about this, because to me there's no true freedom until the state doesn't exist. So let's talk. I don't know if I've ever talked to an anarcho communist though. That would be an interesting conversation.
It would, I agree. I've never talked to one in person, but if they want to try communism on their own and not try to force it on other people, good luck. You're gonna need
Yeah.
it. But so Craig, where can people find you? Where can they find the Bad Roman podcast?
Anywhere you listen to your podcast, we're on every major platform, or you can go to thebadroman.com and find the shows there. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a blog on there that we've kind of let go and hopefully get back to at some point. But there's a lot of great pieces on there that you can go and read about Christianity in the state. I've got one on there myself that I wrote, and I talked a lot about the early Christians and how they engaged Roman Empire. Not to pat myself on the back, but I was pretty proud of that one. It's pretty neat. I'm not much of a writer, but I was kind of proud of that one. I actually had a lot of fun writing. I didn't realize how much fun I would have writing, but that was pretty neat.
Nice.
But yeah, anyway, we've got YouTube. We don't really show a lot of video. We've got video recorded. We might splice some stuff together, do some short takes on it. But we've got a YouTube channel. You can go subscribe there and listen there if that's your preferred method. But yeah, anywhere you listen, you're going to find a bad Roman.
Now, I also understand that you sell salsa.
Yeah, that's a that's an interesting. I don't know what else
Yeah. Is
stepped
is
on
that because
into.
the podcast is so spicy, or how does that?
Maybe, but I've had to tone the spice down on the salsa so more people would buy it. So I've got three different heat levels. I started off just making hot just for myself, and some folks wanted a milder version, so I made a mild one. Then I came up here recently with one right in between the hot and the mild. Been doing some farmers markets. That's what I was talking about earlier about getting to see people face to face and talking to them. When a lot of the folks in this area is Christian, they're conservative Christians, so they're a little more open to the conversation. And when they see no king but Christ, they want to talk about it. It's given me a lot of opportunity to have these one-on-one conversations with folks. But the salsa is a byproduct of the Bad Roman Project. Basically, it was something that I was doing as a hobby, and it turned into a side hustle. Now it's a thing, and I ship this stuff all across the country. I learned how to make it shelf stable. Learned taught myself how to can it, which that whole process to me is pretty neat too.
It is that can even be done. And
Yeah.
that's also you can get it on badroman.com.
No, it's not part of the website.
Ah.
I'm still working on that part. But you can email us at badromansalsa@gmail.com. There's a Bad Roman Salsa Facebook page as well. You can go message me there or message me directly. I'm happy to
Oh, it
get
is
your
a
address and
thing.
send you some. Hi.
You're right, it is a thing now.
It's a busy thing. I've I made 100 jars of salsa last night.
Whew, it's a
I got
lot.
back-to-back farmers markets coming up August 3rd, August 10th, and then August 31st and September 7th. So I've been trying to make sure I've got enough for those, especially for these first two. That I got a couple week break where I can make some more if I need to. But I did pretty good in June out there's this Lightfoot Farm Market in Millington, Tennessee, and it's a big one. It got busy.
Nice. An unexpected twist to the Bad Roman
Well,
podcast is the salsa.
we got a table throw that I had my friend Dennis. He's got a print shop in Georgia. He made this table throw for us, and it's got I don't have it hanging up right now, but it's got the Christian anarchist sign on it with the fish with the anarchy, and it's
Mm.
all over this table throw. Well, this guy walked up to the table and goes, "What are you guys, a bunch of Christian anarchists?" That's as a matter of fact,
Actually.
yes. I'm glad you asked.
Oh, that's funny. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming to the show. I'll be delighted. Put the links down in the description, and I hope people tune into the podcast. I do. It's pretty great. So thank you for coming and talking with us today.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you listening, and then sharing the stuff around. It's what keeps us going, keeps us motivated. So thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
All right. And thanks everyone for listening. Bye. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what we do here, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and go over to our website where you can offer donations, request help, help us help people who are in need voluntarily. And we'll see you next time.